When you think about modern Japanese corporate culture, that incredible dedication, that group harmony, you probably picture these sleek, modern skyscrapers in Tokyo. But what if I told you that the real philosophical blueprint for all of it was actually drawn up way back in the 18th century? And not by some CEO or shogun, but by a regular, everyday merchant. Let's dig into the surprisingly spiritual roots of Japanese capitalism.
All right, so to really get this, we have to go back in time to Edo period Japan. Society was locked into this really rigid four-tier class system. It was called Shi no Kosho. At the very top, you had the samurai warriors, of course. Then came the farmers, the people who actually grew the food. After them were the artisans, and all the way at the bottom, the absolute bottom of the social ladder, the merchants.
And this setup created this huge society-wide paradox. See, officially, merchants were the lowest of the low. Their whole job, buying things and selling them for a profit, was seen as kind of parasitic, like they weren't really producing anything. But as the economy started to boom, they became incredibly wealthy and powerful. So you have this class of people with all the money, all the economic clout, but zero social respect. The whole country was wrestling with this really fundamental question: is making money just inherently a bad thing? So this is the stage that was set. You've got the merchants, who are basically the engine of the entire economy, but they have no social acceptance. They have all this power, but they don't have an officially recognized purpose for being. There's this quote from the time that just absolutely nails it. On the surface, yeah, the samurai had the political power and the swords. They ran the show. But in reality, it was the merchants who controlled the flow of rice, of money, of everything. They were the silent rulers of Japan's economy, which made that whole official social order look more and more ridiculous. So how do you solve a problem like this, right? How do you give a moral compass to an entire class of people who are seen as greedy by default? Well, the answer came from this truly remarkable man named Ishida Baigan. And the thing about Baigan, what made him so unique, is that he wasn't some high-born aristocrat. He was the son of a farmer who went to work as a clerk in a merchant house. I mean, he was basically an 18th century salaryman. He lived and breathed the very paradox he was trying to solve, and that real-world experience is what gave his philosophy so much power. Now, Baigan didn't just come up with excuses for making a profit. No, he did something way more radical than that. He completely reframed the entire definition of what a merchant's work was, and he gave it this profound moral and spiritual purpose. He founded this school of thought called Sekiman Shingaku, which you could translate as heart learning. Now, instead of inventing some complex new religion, he did something brilliant. He just took existing ideas from Shinto, Buddhism, and Confucianism and blended them into a simple, practical guide for how to be a good person in your daily life. It was philosophy for the people, designed so anyone from a shopkeeper to a samurai could understand and use it. Okay, so at the very heart of his teaching was this idea of hanshin, or the true heart. This was a term his followers really popularized. Baigan taught that every single person is born with this pure, good conscience. And the whole goal of life, it didn't matter if you were a warrior or a merchant, was to listen to and act from that innate goodness inside you.
And this, right here, is where it all clicks into place. The samurai had Bushido, the way of the warrior. It was their clear path to honor, through duty and loyalty. What Baigan did was argue that merchants had their own path, Shonindo, the way of the merchant. Their duty wasn't to a feudal lord, but to all of society. By making sure goods got from one place to another, they were performing a vital public service. Commerce wasn't about greed anymore. It was a noble calling.
This idea, and it was a truly radical idea, that business could actually be a spiritual path, well, that laid the direct ideological foundation for what scholars would later call the spirit of Japanese capitalism. Baigan taught that any merchant who follows their true heart will naturally practice these key virtues: honesty in all your dealings, diligence in your work, and thriftiness in how you live. And here's the kicker. He argued that any profit you earned by sticking to these virtues wasn't a sin. Not at all. It was a just reward, a proper wage for serving society well. Fast forward a couple of centuries, and thinkers like Yamamoto Shichihei looked back and identified Baigan's philosophy as the absolute bedrock of Japan's modern economic miracle. If you look at the chapters in his famous book, you can see that concepts like hanshin weren't just historical footnotes. They were seen as the central code, like the very software that was running Japan's unique economic hardware.
So let's do it. Let's draw a direct line from this 18th century philosophy all the way to the Japanese office culture that we recognize today, because the connection is honestly, it's remarkably strong. See, back in Baigen's time, a big merchant house wasn't just a business. It was what they called a choka kyodotai, a kind of merchant house community. Everyone from the owner down to the newest apprentice lived and worked together. Their personal fates were completely tied to the fate of the house itself. Well, that very same model, that exact mindset, evolved directly into the modern Japanese concept of the kaisha kyodotai, the company as a community. And it's this company as community ethos, which has its philosophical DNA right there in Baigen's teachings, that gave us Japan's iconic post-war employment system. Things like lifetime employment and seniority-based pay, they weren't just cold economic strategies. They were expressions of this deep-seated belief that a company is a collective, a kind of secular family, where the survival and the prosperity of the group comes first. Which leaves us with a really critical question for today. This spirit, born from an 18th century need to give purpose to merchants, no doubt helped build one of the world's most incredible economies. That emphasis on diligence, group harmony, and serving society is incredibly powerful. But in the 21st century, does that same spirit sometimes lead to overwork? Does it stifle individual innovation? Does it limit personal freedom? Is this enduring legacy of vital strength for Japan, or has it become a kind of beautiful, gilded cage?